At 7:42 on the cold morning of March 6, 1944, Colonel Donald Blakeslee sat high in the cockpit of his P-51 Mustang at Debden Airfield, England. The frost clung to the edges of the runway, and the rumble of Rolls-Royce Merlin engines echoed across the airfield. Before him stretched the mission that the Luftwaffe had long believed impossible: a fighter escort all the way to Berlin and back. For years, German intelligence had assured Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring that no American single-engine fighter could reach the capital of the Reich. Berlin, they said, was beyond the reach of Allied air power. But on this morning, the Mustang was about to prove them wrong. Beneath each of Blakeslee's wings hung two 108-gallon paper drop tanks, thin-walled British-made fuel containers designed to burn away after use. They extended the Mustang's range to nearly 850 miles. It meant that for the first time, American fighters could fly deep into the heart of Germany, protect their bombers all the way, engage the enemy, and still make it home. The mission would mark a decisive turning point in the air war over Europe. Just months earlier, the daylight bombing campaign had been teetering on collapse. The fall of 1943 had brought some of the bloodiest losses the 8th Air Force had ever suffered. On October 14th, during the second raid on Schweinfurt's ball-bearing factories, 60 B-17 flying fortresses had failed to return. 600 airmen had been killed or captured in a single day. The bombers could reach the target, yes, but their escorts could not. P-47 Thunderbolts and P-38 Lightnings were powerful, but their fuel capacity limited them to the frontiers of Germany. Once they turned back, the bombers flew the rest of the way alone, easy prey for waves of Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s waiting just beyond escort range. Crews called that stretch of sky the Black Forest of Death. The Luftwaffe called it the Happy Hunting Grounds. Every mission was a gamble with survival. What changed everything was a fighter that almost never happened: the North American P-51 Mustang. The British had first approached North American aviation in 1940, asking for more Curtiss P-40 Warhawks. Instead, the company proposed a new design. In just 117 days, engineers built a prototype that was fast, sleek, and aerodynamic. But its Allison engine lacked power at high altitude. The Mustang was excellent below 15,000 feet, making it useful for reconnaissance and ground attack, but useless for bomber escort. The war in Europe was being fought above 25,000 feet, and up there, the early Mustang simply couldn't breathe. Then came the idea that changed the war. British test pilot Ronald Harker suggested fitting the airframe with the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the same power plant that made the Spitfire legendary. The result was staggering. The Mustang leapt from good to extraordinary. It could now climb faster, dive harder, fly farther, and fight at the same altitudes as the bombers it would one day protect. By late 1943, the P-51B, powered by the Packard-built Merlin, was arriving in England. Its long range and high speed made it the perfect escort. There was one problem. With the fuselage fuel tank full, the Mustang became tail-heavy and unstable in turns. Pilots quickly learned to burn that tank first before combat. But even with its quirks, the P-51 was revolutionary. It carried 450 caliber Browning machine guns, capable of tearing through enemy aircraft in seconds, and could fly faster than anything the Luftwaffe had in the sky at high altitude. When General James Doolittle took command of the 8th Air Force in early 1944, he immediately understood what the Mustang represented. He changed tactics overnight. Instead of ordering the escorts to stay close to the bombers, Doolittle unleashed them to range ahead and hunt the Luftwaffe wherever they took off. It was a bold gamble, to go after the enemy fighters before they reached the bombers, and no one was better suited to lead this new offensive spirit than Colonel Donald Blakeslee, commander of the 4th Fighter Group. Blakeslee, a veteran of the Eagle squadrons who had flown with the RAF before America entered the war, was a fierce, relentless leader. When told it would take 2 weeks to transition his group from P-47s to P-51s, he famously replied, "We'll be operational tomorrow." And they were. The morning of March the 6th, 1944, dawned gray and cold over East Anglia. Blakeslee and his men took off at first light. 48 Mustangs climbed into formation, the Merlin engines roaring in unison as they climbed toward the rising sun. Below them, the roar of over 600 bombers filled the sky, an armada of B-17s and B-24s stretching 70 miles long, heading straight for the capital of the Third Reich. The Luftwaffe scrambled everything it had. Radar stations along the North Sea coast reported the incoming wave, and soon, squadrons of Bf-109s and FW-190s were streaking upward from their airfields. As the formation crossed the Rhine, contrails streaked across the upper sky. The radio crackled. "Bandits, 11 o'clock high, 20 plus. Came the call. Blakeslee's voice cut through the static. "Let's get 'em, boys!" The sky erupted. Mustangs dove from altitude, their 6-second bursts shredding German formations before they could reach the bombers. In a single pass, American fighters scattered entire squadrons. The Luftwaffe pilots, many of them veterans of the Battle of Britain, were stunned. The new American fighters were faster and stayed on their tails all the way down. Above Berlin, the bombers released their loads through thick black flak clouds, their bombs falling on factories, rail yards, and government buildings. From his headquarters, Goering watched from the windows of the Reich Air Ministry. White contrails curved above the city, contrails of American fighters. He knew at that moment that Germany had lost the air war. The return flight was just as perilous. German anti-aircraft batteries hurled up walls of fire. Many P-51s returned with holes punched through their wings and fuselages, but the mission was a success. Not a single bomber was lost to enemy fighters. Blakeslee's Mustang landed at Debden with barely 20 gallons of fuel remaining. Just 10 minutes of flight time. But history had been made. 2 days later, they went back. This time, 800 bombers and nearly 900 fighters struck Berlin again in what would become known as Black Monday. It was one of the largest air battles of the war. The Luftwaffe threw everything it had, 350 fighters, into the skies. German aces like Günther Rall, Walter Nowotny, and Johannes Steinhoff fought valiantly, but they faced an enemy that now dictated the terms of battle. The P-51s swept across the sky in deadly packs, cutting down enemy planes before they could even reach the bombers. By the end of the day, the Luftwaffe had lost over 70 aircraft, and even more were damaged beyond repair. The skies over Berlin were no longer safe, not even for the defenders of the Reich. The psychological shock was immense. German pilots returning to base spoke of an enemy that seemed to appear from nowhere, fight with terrifying precision, and disappear again at will. The myth of German air superiority was shattered. Even Göring himself later admitted, "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the war was lost." Through the spring of 1944, the Mustangs carried the fight deeper into Germany. They roamed the skies over airfields, rail yards, and industrial centers, attacking everything that moved. By April, the Luftwaffe was bleeding to death. In a single month, over 400 experienced German pilots were killed or captured. With fuel shortages crippling the training of replacements, new recruits arrived at the front with only a few dozen hours of flight experience. They were no match for American veterans who had hundreds of combat hours in the cockpit. The P-51s began strafing airfields directly, destroying planes on the ground faster than Germany could build them. By the time D-Day arrived on June 6, 1944, the Luftwaffe was a shadow of its former self. Allied aircraft flew over 14,000 sorties in support of the Normandy landings. German resistance in the air was almost non-existent. The sky belonged entirely to the Allies. The P-51 Mustang had done more than escort bombers. It had broken the back of the Luftwaffe. It made the invasion of Europe possible. In the months that followed, the Mustang continued its dominance across Europe. It escorted bombers to Munich, Leipzig, and Dresden, hunted Me-262 jet fighters, and even strafed Hitler's mountain retreat at Berchtesgaden. By war's end, P-51 pilots had destroyed nearly 5,000 enemy aircraft in the air and thousands more on the ground. Pilots who flew it described it as almost an extension of themselves, responsive, powerful, graceful. When peace finally came in 1945, the P-51 Mustang stood as more than just a machine. It was a symbol of engineering brilliance, of courage, and of the moment the tide of war truly turned. For the men who flew it, like Blakeslee, Gentile, Godfrey, and hundreds of others, it was the fighter that gave them the reach to strike deep into the enemy's heart and come home again. For the Germans who saw its silhouette glinting against the high sun, it was the sign that the sky, and soon the world, no longer belonged to them.